Hi, I'm Linda Mallett, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the Amon Museum of American Art, and our interviewer, Aimee Cardoso, speaks with Keith F. Davis, Senior Curator of Photography at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, about the exhibition Multitude, Solitude, the Photographs of Dave Heath. Now for Art This Week.
Hi, I'm here at the Amon Museum of American Art to talk about the exhibition Multitude, Solitude, the Photographs of Dave Heath. And here to join me is Keith Davis, the Senior Curator of Photography at the Nelson Atkins. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here, thank you.
So to start off, let's talk a little bit about his childhood. Looking at some of these images, you kind of get a sense that it may have been a little bit of a struggle. So can you tell us about his grown-up time?
Yeah, Dave's whole life, as he understood it, was shaped by this primal sin, this primal trauma of his early life, where he was abandoned by both parents by the age of 4 and grew up a little bit with extended family, but mostly in orphanages, in foster homes, and none of that was terribly happy. So his fundamental sort of foundational experience as a child was this desperate need for connection, and that provides the direction for all the work that follows.
So how did he discover photojournalism? I know kind of when you're talking about he's looking for direction, he sort of found that in a magazine. Can you tell us a little bit about that time?
Yeah, he was an avid reader of Life magazine. Like so many Americans, Life had an amazing circulation back in those days. And in 1947, he came across one particular story that registered very profoundly. It was called Bad Boy's Story, about a young boy, roughly his age, growing up in an orphanage, and how this young troubled youth was getting his act together through his own effort and through the counseling of the professionals in this orphanage. The whole notion of orphans was a big deal after World War II because of all the losses during the war, and there were many articles and there was a lot of popular attention to the whole notion of orphans and orphanages. And so Dave is part of that larger theme, if you will. But that Life magazine story registered very powerfully. He realized that the photographic image could convey both this other boy's story, but also he realized it could convey my story. You know, I can be part of this kind of process. I can use the medium myself. And he dove into it wholeheartedly at the age of 16.
And it was kind of one of those things where it gave him some self-identity, like how he's able to be like, okay, I fit here in this world. And
yes, he never completely fit in anywhere, but he did get part-time jobs in corner drugstore photography labs at the time, and he went out and photographed on the streets, all his free time as a late teenager. So he understood the medium. He liked it. He was fascinated by its potential to communicate both facts and ideas and emotions. And he latched onto it big time, and that was his medium till the day he died.
And I know he traveled quite extensively across the U.S. To broaden his subject matter. Where all did he go before New York, like doing his street photography? And did he work with anyone? Who was he looking at kind of at that time?
Well, he grew up in Philadelphia, was there both before and after he served in Korea. He was in Korea for a year and a half, 53, 54. After Korea, he goes to Chicago for about a year and a half and works in a commercial studio and just does his own work. He had tried to get into the Institute of Design to study with Callahan and Siskind, but wasn't able to do that, so he just did his own work. And then in early January 1957, he moves to New York City. So in 57, he's 26 years old, and he's been going through what really he felt and understood to be a self-directed apprenticeship, perhaps. And his arrival in New York meant that he was ready for the big time. He was ready to play in the big leagues, and he succeeded brilliantly. Now, before that, he was visually just hungry for information. So he read photography books, he read technique books, he read art history books, he went to the Philadelphia Art Museum to study old master paintings and contemporary paintings. He just devoured all the information he could get his hands on. And as I've said, he understood completely the gigantic benefit of having a great free art museum just down the street. And so he took full advantage and spent days and days and days there, probably some total of months of his life at the Philadelphia Art Museum. So he was really self-educated, but he was brilliant enough that he instinctively knew what the best sources were, what the most interesting photo books were. He learned from the best, Walker Evans, Wright Morris, et cetera. So he was very intelligent, super intelligent, and incredibly curious. He just devoured information.
And around that time too, he started making his maquettes, which are also on display here.
Right.
Those are handmade books, and what prompted him to make those? And was he able to show them anywhere, or?
Well, the maquettes, which are one-of-a-kind book prototypes, essentially, serve two purposes. One, they function as a kind of portfolio. So if he wanted to show his work to somebody, he could just pull out one or more of the maquettes. But secondly, and just as importantly, they allowed him to think through ideas of editing and sequencing. To even, in 1952, the maquettes were made between 52 and 1956. But in that period, you can see that he's very intently exploring how photographs work on pages. One image on a left page, one image on a right page, how do they relate, and how do they relate to the spread that comes after and the spread that comes before? So he's interested not only in making the best single images he can, but ordering them in some new way to suggest a larger network of meaning. He's not telling stories per se. He's not working in a photojournalistic mode, but he wants to create this larger fabric of meaning.
And it's really interesting to look at those maquettes and see how he completely transformed the images there to the ones that you see on the wall. And that was, through editing processes. And there's actually a touch screen where you can look and see the editing that he did for, I think it's A Vengeful Sister.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and the bleaching process that he was kind of known to use?
Well, he became one of the greatest black and white photographic printmakers the world has ever seen by the late 1950s. He had astonishing technical skills, and he really worked at it hard. He, in part, used ferrocyanide bleaching in a way that the famous journalist W. Gene Smith did, whereas you could make a print and maybe make it a little heavier, a little darker than what you'd naturally do in order to make shadow areas extremely rich and mysterious. But then with the careful application of diluted bleach, you could open up, you could reduce the darkness in certain areas. It's a very finicky process. No one does it now. But with that, he could essentially work in a pre-Photoshop sort of way to say, here's the final image. I like everything that's going on here, but I need to open up these specific little areas.
Right.
And you do that with the careful application of bleach. The Vengeful Sister demonstration is really fascinating. He worked on that more vigorously or aggressively than many images, but it shows how open he was to cropping and rethinking an image if it had some potential for him. In that case, he took a vertical frame and chopped off the top half and basically threw it away, then just took the bottom half and cropped in on that, but then used dodging and burning to simplify and highlight basic tonal relationships. So these kind of controls were always available to photographers. They're not new. Photoshop allows us to do such things in a more precise way, but those kind of basic controls have always been there, but they require real work. But Heath was totally willing to put in the time to learn how to do these difficult techniques, and then to really make prints that were 100% right.
So you talked about these maquettes and how they were creating these narratives. And one of the ones that I guess he actually successfully finished or made the book is A Dialogue with Solitude, which we see behind us.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about this and how it was finished and how it's now actually in the catalog for this show?
Yeah. The Dialogue with Solitude, which is the centerpiece of the installation at the Amon Carter here, really is the culmination of Dave's whole early career. He saw it as that, he understood it as that, he had high ambitions for this sequence. He went through multiple iterations of it over a period through 1961 and through 1962. The master printing session for these prints, all of these prints were made in October, November of 1962, when he sequestered himself in his apartment with his darkroom and just worked as much during the day as he possibly could. He'd collapse at night and then work again the next day. It was weeks of work, and as he said, he began this work, I think, the day before, the day after the Cuban Missile Crisis began. And as he said to me, maybe a little bit melodramatically, but he said, I began work every single day hoping the world wouldn't blow up because I really wanted to finish this project. So it's a little melodramatic, but there's some real truth to it. He's creating this literally in a time of political fear, of the exchange of A-bombs and so forth. I mean, it was a very tense time. But that's sort of the backdrop for him to make this grand, complicated, rich statement about the difficulties and the joys of human existence. And so, it all sort of comes together. But yeah, these were done in one extended session in late 1962. This is the final, what we have on view is the final maquette from which the book was actually made. There are 3 or 4 preceding maquettes, often very rough with different prints that are not as good. These are perfect prints because he wanted to make perfect prints in order to make the reproductions from the best possible print that he had. But he also printed these to the exact size that he knew he wanted on the page. But at any rate, this is the 4th or 5th, it may be the 5th of his maquettes, but it's the final one.
We know he did beautiful photography. What kind of cameras was he using? And then also you touched on in the 70s how he actually kind of experimented with some audio-visual work and kind of performance art. Can you talk about what other mediums he may have explored?
His classic black and white work was all done with 35mm cameras. He was an incredible craftsman. He shot +X film, so kind of a medium speed film. But he got the maximum possibilities out of that small 35mm format. He used a camera like that because he wanted to work quickly, intuitively, in a kind of intimate way, on the public sidewalk or in parks or so forth. So he's not dragging around big cameras. He's using small cameras. He worked in that mode until the late 1960s. And then, as the show demonstrates, he shifted to an audio-visual presentation of his images, where he made black and white slides of many of his images from that period and projected them in a, I think it's a 12-minute program, 2 slide trays, pairs of projections, with a soundtrack by the musician Tim Buckley. That was the first of 5 or 6 such audiovisual programs that ran through the 70s and up to about 1980, as I recall. And they got more complicated and more elaborate. One of them, I think, was a 5-screen projection with, and it ran like 80 minutes with music. I mean, incredibly elaborate. No one's seen those since the 1980s because they exist only as these trays of original slides. And the mechanics of them hardly exist anymore, the mechanics to run them. We digitized the AV program that's here, the Beyond the Gates, so it's easily showable. It's not exactly what viewers would have seen, but it's a good digital facsimile of what they would have seen. In the 1980s, he worked largely with Polaroid, making one-of-a-kind little color Polaroids. Then in 2001, he shifted back to street photography, this time with a digital camera working in color. And the book that I've done for the show comes right up to his work in the 21st century, the color street work. That is not part of this show due to space, but it was part of the original project and is part of the book. So he photographed actively from 1947 to about 2009 or 10. So that's a good long career.
Did you ever ask him why he switched to color and then back?
Yeah. He was excited by the simplicity of digital cameras. For him, they reminded him of the simplicity of Polaroid cameras from 20 years before, where you just press the button and the picture comes out. He loved that kind of simplicity. He made his own inkjet prints. And he liked color at that point. He said, the world is in color, and he said, I love black and white when I did it. He felt that black and white, and it does, that black and white has a whole different kind of mood and expressive language, which was entirely right for what he was doing in the 50s, 60s. But by 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, in the 21st century, he was more interested in the language of color.
What do you hope, as visitors come and see this show, and especially as the Amon Carter being a free museum, which is fantastic.
Yes.
What do you hope that the viewers get out of this exhibition? To slow down, kind of, and really take time with each piece?
Yeah. Well, I'd like for the name Dave Heath to have a bit more public recognition than it does, and this obviously helps a lot. I do honestly think that the emotional sincerity and reality and power of these pictures will come across to almost any viewer. These aren't just casual pictures. They're not all pretty pictures, certainly, but they're all profoundly meaningful, and they're part of this very personal and coherent and important artistic vision. Dave Heath, I think, really was one of the great photographic artists of the late 20th century, the last half of the 20th century. And this is his masterwork. In this project, he pulls as many threads together as he could think of in the richest and most intellectually rewarding kind of way. And it's a body of work that deserves looking at carefully and to some degree repeatedly. The prints are beautiful. No one's made black and white prints more beautifully than Dave Heath did. But the overall statement of our common humanity is really powerful, and I think that doesn't date at all. These pictures are 50 and 60 years old, but the ideas and the emotions that come out of these pictures are today's emotions and today's ideas. Those don't date.
Very true. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We want to thank Keith for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to cartermuseum.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid. The thought of you